medicine. We have increased safe water production and distribution from nothing to 100,000 gallons a day. This relief effort is the most difficult and complex the world has faced in decades. I want to commend all those in the field who are facing the frustrations and the heroic challenges. The United States must do more. Today, I have requested that Congress immediately provide $320 million in emergency relief assistance. I commend Chairman Obey, Chairman Byrd, Senator Leahy, and their colleagues for their swift action yesterday in support of the initial $50 million of these funds. If Congress approves the balance of our request, this would bring total United States assistance since April to almost $500 million. To monitor our on-the-ground activities in the refugee camps, I have asked Secretary Perry to visit the region this weekend and to make an immediate report to me upon his findings. We are urgently reviewing whether to open a new airfield in Kigali in Rwanda to help deliver supplies that are being held up because of the limited airport capacity in Zaire. Let me be clear about this. Any deployment of United States troops inside Rwanda would be for the immediate and the sole purpose of humanitarian relief, not for peacekeeping. The men and women of our armed forces have responded to this tragedy with vigor and speed. They have already met the goals we set out last week. The Entebbe Air Hub is operating around the clock. The Goma Airport is capable of operating 24 hours a day. Transportation between airfields and the refugee camps is vastly improved. And as I noted, we are expanding water supplies as quickly as we possibly can. The United States is also working hard with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to create conditions that are necessary for the refugees to return home to Rwanda. Assistant Secretary of State George Moose will be traveling again to Kigali this weekend to continue his talks with the new leadership, and we are hopeful that more refugees will be returning soon. That is the only solution, ultimately, to this humanitarian tragedy. Yesterday, I met with representatives of the world's private relief organizations, whose employees and volunteers have converged on the refugee camps. The American people should know about the remarkable skill and compassion they bring to their work. But they, too, need more assistance to continue. And I appeal to all Americans to reach out in the form of private contributions to these relief efforts so that more people can be kept alive. Working together with the international community, both public and private, I believe we are making progress in the battle against suffering and death on the borders of Rwanda. The United States will not cease its efforts until the dying stops and the refugees have returned. This is our mission. We must continue it until it's accomplished. Before I close, I'd also like to say a word about the terrible wildfires that are burning in the West. As of this morning, we had reports of 320 fires burning in 7 states. The Interagency Fire Command Center in Boise reports that the federal government has mobilized more than 330 fire crews and more than 200 fire engines, helicopters, and air tankers. 2 battalions of Marines have begun training today and will be deployed to fight the fires as soon as possible. Our hearts go out to all those who have been displaced or who have lost property in these fires. The federal government will continue to monitor the situation closely, to marshal the necessary resources, and to coordinate the firefighting efforts. This is a deeply troubling development, but we will do all we can to help them deal with it. Now I'd like to turn the briefing over to the National Security Advisor, Mr. Lake, and to General Shalikashvili to discuss the operations in Rwanda in greater detail and to answer whatever questions you have.
How many troops would have to go if there are troops who have to go to Kigali, Mr. President?
I want to let, you've asked me 3 questions. I want to let General Shalikashvili respond to Andrea's question. I don't think that mission creep is not a problem here, and General Shalikashvili will explain why that is. We've had a long talk. We just completed about an hour and 45 minutes national security principals meeting this morning, and I do not believe that is a problem. With regard to the French will have to make whatever decision they make, but I do believe you will have large numbers of people contributing to this humanitarian effort. I was most deeply moved when we met yesterday at some length, and the General and Mr. Lake and others briefed the representatives of the non-governmental organizations. I am deeply moved by the number of volunteer organizations, many of them American citizens, who are there working. I think everyone knows this is a humanitarian effort, and it will be kept at that. Thank you.
Holding up the deployment to Kigali.
Thank you.
Do you plan to intervene in the baseball strike?
The answer to the question on baseball is that I hope so, but I have not discussed it with the President. Let me, if I may, before we will answer your questions, we thought it would be useful first if General Shalikashvili were to run through with you the actions that the American military have taken since the President ordered them a week ago to take on responsibility for 4 of the 8 packages of effort that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees asked us to assume. I said a week ago when we first announced this that we could not guarantee in this race against time that we would save every life and meet every need in the camps, and we cannot do so. But I did guarantee that we would do everything we can, and I think the President is well satisfied, I certainly am, that our military are in fact doing so. In fact, yesterday, after General Shalikashvili had run through with the leaders of the non-governmental organizations what we are doing, I said that I thought that there was only one institution in the world that could accomplish this, and that is the American military, and they burst into applause. I will not ask you to do the same thing, but I will turn it over now to General Shalikashvili.
What I would like to do, if it's all right with you, is spend just a few moments with you before we turn it over to questions and answers, to kind of put in perspective, as I see it, what has happened since the President directed the military to go to the area and try our very best to make a difference. The first thing I will say is the very obvious that you so well know, and that you and your colleagues have reported on so well. It is an enormous tragedy that's ongoing there, by any measure. We're using every means available to us, intelligence airplanes and other things, to give us a clear picture where all the refugees really are and what the conditions of those camps are. And I will show you in a minute a slide where we see all of them are, sort of in a kind of cartoon fashion, just to highlight that the problem is larger than just Goma. But it is true that by every information that we have been able to gather so far, the conditions in and around Goma are the most severe and the most taxing. The second thing I will tell you is also obvious, and that is that I understand well the frustrations of the people in and out of uniform in places like Goma and everywhere else. It would be very strange if they did not feel impatient and frustrated with the flow of humanitarian assistance, with the water purification equipment, with the medical teams, because the need is really so very vast. And yet, as much as we race against time to enlarge the airfields, the infrastructure that leads up to the airfields, it will continue for quite some time to be a race against time and against those priorities that far exceed our ability to squeeze all of that in through very limited airfields in the area. That, by the way, is one of the reasons why the President stated that on an urgent basis, we're looking at the possibility of opening Kigali as an additional airfield in our fight against this humanitarian disaster. And I'll say a few more words about that. Then one final thing I want to say, and then I'll get into the charts, and that is that despite the tension and despite the frustrations, I, for one, will tell you that I have seldom seen a better cooperation between American military forces there, between the non-governmental agencies, UNHCR, the French who are there in great numbers, and others. It is, despite the frustration that you hear expressed on the ground, which are very understandable, overall, an extraordinary cooperative effort where a multitude of organizations are pulling together, trying to deal with this as rapidly as we possibly can. Now, having said that, let me run through a couple charts here to sort of, not to show you anything new, but hopefully to try to put it in perspective for you. I told you that one of the things we looked at was the issue of trying to get a better...
General John Shalikashvili, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in the White House briefing room, talking to White House correspondents about the Operation Support Hope. That's the official title of this United States effort. A short while ago, if you missed him, President Clinton appeared in the briefing room to tick off what has been done thus far by Washington to aid in this tragic humanitarian story. The president said water supplies are being expanded. He said so far 1,300 tons of equipment, including food, water, bulldozers, what have you, have been delivered. On the fresh water front, which is so crucial to battling the cholera epidemic that has broken out, President Clinton said fresh water is being produced at roughly 100,000 gallons a day. And then the president announced that the White House is immediately asking Congress to provide a total of $320 million in emergency assistance. He complimented Congress for granting approval of $50 million thus far. He said since April, if you include this latest emergency request of $320 million, the United States assistance program will have amounted to more than $500 million. And then, very importantly, President Clinton said the United States is reviewing whether to open a new airfield in Rwanda, namely Kigali. And he underscored this very, very strongly. He said any deployment of U.S. troops would be for the immediate and sole purpose of humanitarian relief. One of the problems with the Goma Zaire airport over there where Christian Amanpour is that the taxi space is very limited. When the big C-130 Hercules planes go in, they land, but there's very little tarmac space. Christian, what the president announced and what General Shalikashvili is discussing now, might that sort of buck up the UN officials and the rescue workers over there where you are?
Well, certainly any additional airspace and hub would be welcome from the point of view of getting food out properly. You know, I think both the President and General John Shalikashvili expressed their frustration so well, saying that this was the most difficult and most complex humanitarian catastrophe that the world has had to deal with, and they both admit that although they won't be able to deal with everything, just being able to do a little is better than nothing. And today we heard from General Daniel Schroeder, who's the commander of the Combined Task Force here, and he basically said no matter how much we do, no matter how much we bring in, it's like trying to get a camel through the eye of the needle at these airports here. And also, no matter how much they bring in, there is no infrastructure in this country. There are no proper roads. There is one road leading from here, this airport, all the way up to the north that go past these camps. It is congested. There are refugees all over it. There's local traffic. There's aid traffic. There are no railways. There's no rivers to send it up by barge or anything like that. So those things are very, very frustrating. Also, we didn't hear a promise of bringing in any tankers, water tankers, and the valiant U.S. troops who are out there pumping out their pure water have appealed for more vehicles and more water tankers, and they really need that to get that out. But any help is welcome here, and I think everybody's well aware of the frustrations of trying to deal with this catastrophe that really is on an unprecedented scale, Bernie.
Thank you. Christian Amanpour reporting live from Goma, Zaire. Two statements I want to report to you that the president uttered in his briefing. At one point, the president said, the only solution to this humanitarian tragedy is for the Rwandans to return home. And Mr. Clinton concluding by saying, we are making progress in the battle against death on the Rwandan border. CNN will continue its live coverage of the Whitewater hearings, which have shifted to the Senate side of the Capitol. We'll continue that in a moment, and we remind you that in about 31 minutes, we will take you live to Los Angeles for the hearing on the defense motions in the O.J. Simpson.
Entebbe Air Hub is operating around the clock. The Goma Airport is capable of operating 24 hours a day. Transportation between airfields and the refugee camps is vastly improved. And as I noted, we are expanding water supplies as quickly as we possibly can. The United States is also working hard with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to create conditions that are necessary for the refugees to return home to Rwanda. Assistant Secretary of State George Moose will be traveling again to Kigali this weekend to continue his talks with the new leadership, and we are hopeful that more refugees will be returning soon. That is the only solution, ultimately, to this humanitarian tragedy. Yesterday, I met with representatives of the world's private relief organizations, whose employees and volunteers have converged on the refugee camps. The American people should know about the remarkable skill and compassion they bring to their work, but they too need more assistance to continue. And I appeal to all Americans to reach out in the form of private Chairman Obey, Chairman Byrd, Senator Leahy, and their colleagues for their swift action yesterday in support of the initial $50 million of these funds. If Congress approves the balance of our request, this would bring total United States assistance since April to almost $500 million. To monitor our on-the-ground activities in the refugee camps, I have asked Secretary Perry to visit the region this weekend and to make an immediate report to me upon his findings. We are urgently reviewing whether to open a new airfield in Kigali in Rwanda to help deliver supplies that are being held up because of the limited airport capacity in Zaire. Let me be clear about this. Any deployment of United States troops inside Rwanda would be for the immediate and the sole purpose of humanitarian relief, not for peacekeeping. The men and women of our armed forces have responded to this tragedy with vigor and speed. They have already met the goals we set out last week. We have increased safe water production and distribution from nothing to 100,000 gallons a day. This relief effort is the most difficult and complex the world has faced in decades. I want to commend all those in the field who are facing the frustrations and the heroic challenges. The United States must do more. Today, I have requested that Congress immediately provide $320 million in emergency relief assistance. I commend